I didn't cry when he said it. I didn't throw anything, didn't ask why. I just stood there in our kitchen, my hand still resting on the handle of the kettle, steam rising in soft coils beside my face, and listened. He looked relieved, like a man who'd finally delivered the line he'd been practicing in the mirror. 4 years, and all it came down to was 10 words. You're not exactly wife material. I think this is best. No tears, no yelling, just that. A clean, quiet ending, rehearsed like a line in a play. Behind him, our apartment looked almost staged. The mid-century credenza we thrifted together. The still-wrapped, ring-sized gift bag on the coffee table. I'd found it earlier that week tucked behind his dresser drawer, thought maybe, just maybe, he was planning something. Turns out, he was. He offered a small, almost apologetic smile, like he thought saying it softly would soften the blow, like I was supposed to thank him for his honesty. But I just nodded, once, and watched as he picked up his keys from the hook near the door. I'll send someone for the rest of my things, he said. Then he was gone. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full. Pressurized. 4 years of late-night talks, of synced calendars and whispered dreams and half-spoken plans about Tuscany and terracotta kitchens, all of it collapsed into a vacuum. Gone. I didn't move for a long time. Just stood there, staring at the spot where he'd stood. My reflection in the window looked calm. Too calm. Like a woman who hadn't just been handed the neatest breakup in romantic history. No outbursts, no explanations, just a verdict. It would be weeks before I realized what that line really meant. Not, you're not wife material. No. What he meant was, you're not the kind of woman I can lie to forever. And he was right. But not in the way he thought. I saw it on a Sunday. Brunch had just ended. Me, 2 girlfriends, too many mimosas, and not enough honesty. We danced around topics, stuck to safe updates, careers, Pilates instructors, a funny date someone went on. No one asked about Daniel. I didn't bring him up. I was unlocking my phone to call a ride when I saw the notification, Daniel Hughes is engaged. One of those tagged photo alerts, the kind you don't mean to open but do anyway. It was a candid, a sunset backdrop. Her head tilted against his chest, her hand lifted in a loose wave that conveniently caught the ring's sparkle. The caption was hers. Forever starts now, hand engaged, my best friend. I remember staring at the photo, thumb frozen above the screen, and feeling the wind get knocked out of me, not with rage or heartbreak, but with something colder. Something like betrayal, wearing a silk tie. The date on the post was recent. The kind of recent that made timelines awkward, because I'd done the math even when I didn't want to. We broke up 5 months ago. He met her weeks after that, maybe days. Which meant that while I was scrubbing our apartment clean of his cologne and half-finished plans, he was already rewriting a new script. They moved fast. Too fast. Engagement ring, engagement party, whole new narrative, one where I didn't exist. In the photos, he looked light, effortless, as if the last 4 years had been a pit stop, not a partnership. I didn't comment. Didn't like it. Didn't even screenshot it. I just locked my phone and stood in silence as traffic rolled by. One of my friends glanced over and asked if I was okay. I nodded too quickly. Just a spam message, I said. The words came out practiced, like I'd said them before. I knew I shouldn't spiral. People move on. Love evolves. Timing is strange, but it wasn't the speed that cut the deepest. It was the revision, the way he'd rewritten our story like it was a failed draft, something to be discarded,
not even worth a footnote. It wasn't grief I felt, it was insult. He didn't leave me for her. He used her to erase me. And maybe that was the part that stung most, because I had loved him with such intention, with lists and laughter and quiet belief that love was a thing you watered, not replaced. But he didn't water. He jumped. Still, I said nothing. I didn't text, didn't ask who she was, didn't demand a conversation I already knew he'd dodge. Instead, I let the silence harden into something sharper. Because I still had our messages, the old threads, the cloud backups, and eventually I'd open them again. Not out of nostalgia, but out of necessity. The first time I opened the old chat thread, it wasn't on purpose. I'd been clearing out my phone, deleting screenshots and unsubscribing from email lists I never remembered joining. It was supposed to be spring cleaning for my digital life. No sentiment, just space. But somewhere between folders and backups, I landed on the cloud archive we. Never bothered to shut down. Shared photos, voice notes, texts. A digital ghost town of our relationship. For a moment, I hovered. That familiar ache settled behind my ribs. The one I'd trained myself to ignore. But curiosity isn't always loud. Sometimes it just taps once, softly. I tapped in. At first, it was harmless. A photo from last winter, Daniel laughing mid-sentence, a smear of hot sauce on his chin. A video of us at the farmer's market arguing about tomatoes. I didn't cry. I didn't even smile. I just watched it like someone reviewing footage of a life that didn't quite belong to them anymore, but then I scrolled further, past the ending, past the day he said goodbye, and that's when it started. A voice note, time-stamped 2 weeks after the breakup. Just wanted to say I miss you. I know this is probably a bad idea, but yeah, I think about you a lot. I sat up straighter, replayed it, checked the date again. Then another message. This one a DM sent at 2:14 in the morning. Are you seeing anyone? Just wondering. No reason. And another. I still think about us. Not sure I made the right call. They kept coming. Scattered over a few weeks, always late, always impulsive. The language wasn't remorseful. It was murky, self-serving. Not love, not longing, just noise from someone who couldn't stand the quiet after me. But then I found the one that turned my stomach. Sent exactly 15 days after our breakup, while he was supposedly falling for his future bride. Would you ever consider meeting up? Just once? For closure. Closure. As if I was a door he forgot to lock. There it was, his truth. Not the one he posted in engagement photos or shared at brunch tables with friends who never met me. The private version. The one where he kept a window open while decorating another woman's future. I sat with that for a long time. Not in heartbreak, in clarity. He hadn't moved on. He'd moved sideways. And somewhere deep in his gut, he knew it. That's why he still messaged me in the dark. That's why he still clung to the idea that I might respond. I didn't delete the messages. I didn't even reply. But I took screenshots, saved the voice notes, and started a new folder. Because when someone tries to erase you, the smartest thing you can do is document everything they forgot you kept. There's a particular kind of fury that doesn't shout. It doesn't slam doors or throw glasses. It simmers, stays low, gathers weight. That's the kind of fury I felt when I started lining up the messages. One after another. Dated, time-stamped, clear. 2 weeks after our breakup, he was already telling someone else he loved them. 3 weeks after that, he was asking if I'd sleep with him. Just once more. For closure, he said, as if my body was an exclamation point on the sentence he never bothered to finish. I didn't react at first, didn't cry, didn't scream. Instead, I opened my laptop. I created a folder, labeled it cleanly, just his initials. Inside, I placed the screenshots, not out of vengeance, out of necessity, out of the quiet conviction that truth, when documented well, becomes undeniable. There were other messages too, confessions framed as hypotheticals. "I don't know if I'm ready for this relationship," he wrote, referring to his fiancée. "She's amazing, but it's all happening fast. Fast." That was the word that kept repeating in his texts. Like speed absolved him. Like the pace of things somehow justified the overlap. He talked about doubts, about wondering if he rushed, about thinking of me, especially at night, when everything else quieted down and he could feel the echo of our life together. At first, I thought maybe he was just unraveling, confused. But then I noticed something more calculated. These weren't slips. These were probes. He was testing for warmth, seeing if the door was still cracked open. He wanted to know if I still thought about him, if I'd be willing to complicate his new narrative by keeping his past alive in secret. He didn't want me back. He wanted me available. That realization hit harder than the breakup itself, because suddenly I saw the full picture. Not just a man who moved on too quickly, but a man who never stopped hedging his bets. His new fiancée? She wasn't the next chapter. She was the safety net. The polished version of a life he thought he deserved. And me? I was the insurance policy, the emotional spare tire, the one he could circle back to if the fairy tale started cracking at the edges. That's when something shifted in me. Not rage, not pain, precision. I made copies of everything, labeled them by week, by topic. I created a timeline. I backed it up in 2 different places, cloud and hard drive. And then I did something I hadn't done since the day he left. I Googled her. Her name was easy to find. His fiancée. Public profile, smiling photos. A post about bridal fittings with a caption about love being patient and kind. I stared at that photo for a long time. Because what she didn't know, what no one knew, was that while she was preparing to marry him, he was still messaging the woman he said wasn't wife material. I've always been good with systems. I used to plan corporate retreats with military precision, color-coded itineraries, synchronized travel schedules, dietary logs down to the last gluten-free appetizer. Logistics were my language. So when it came to organizing Daniel's betrayal, I slipped back into that part of myself without hesitation. I started with a spreadsheet. Column A, date. Column B, message excerpt. Column C, platform. Column D, relevance. Next came the screenshots, numbered and matched to entries in the sheet. I tagged each one with red flags. Phrases like, "I still think about you," and "It's not serious yet," stood out in bold. For context, I added brief summaries. What was happening in his relationship when he sent each message? Posts I'd seen from her, public declarations, soft lies. Then the voice notes. I transcribed them by hand. Each one carefully documented, labeled with timestamps and file names. I was building a case, not for court, but for clarity. There's power in assembling truth with structure. The world gives way to paper, to records, to evidence, and that's exactly what I intended to have. I kept everything discreet. No names in the folder titles, no hints on my desktop, just an unassuming file nested inside another, waiting for the moment I'd decide what to do with it. At first, I didn't know. Maybe I was just documenting to feel sane.
Maybe it was about control. After all, when someone tears down your life with a single sentence, you start looking for things you can still organize. But the more I built, the more I realized this wasn't just therapy. It was strategy. Because if he was willing to lie to her and keep me in orbit as a fallback, then what did that say about the man she was about to marry? The question stopped me one night, mid-entry, as I copied a particularly damning DM into the log. He had written, "I'm not sure if I'm doing the right thing. She's sweet, but it doesn't feel the same." I sat back, stared at the screen. It doesn't feel the same. No, it wouldn't. Because with me, he had someone who called him out when things got slippery. With her, it seemed, he had a blank slate. That's what he wanted. A reset. A woman who didn't know the old patterns, who didn't see the red flags as clearly, who hadn't traced the trajectory of his avoidant apologies. But I knew better. I'd lived inside the fog long enough to map every blind turn, so I kept building, quietly, neatly, without a whisper of warning to him or anyone else, because one day I might hand that woman a folder, not to ruin her life, but to make sure she doesn't lose hers trying to build it with a man who only tells the truth when it's too late. It would have been easy to send it right then, to forward the folder in an email, to attach the files to an anonymous message, to drop it into her DMs with a simple line, "You deserve to know the whole truth." But I didn't. Not because I doubted the evidence or because I was afraid of what would happen next. I waited because timing matters. Delivery is everything. And if I was going to strike, it would be with precision, not impulse. So instead, I paused. I backed up the folder to an encrypted drive. Made a printed version too. Everything sorted in order, clipped and clean. A hard copy sealed in a slim envelope, tucked into my desk drawer beneath a stack of utility bills and tax returns. It sat there, waiting, like a matchbook in a drawer, small, contained, but ready to burn the whole house down if needed. I kept tabs on them without making a sound. No likes, no comments, just quiet observation. The wedding date was announced on her profile, a soft caption about fate and gratitude, a filtered shot of them holding hands beneath string lights, faces turned toward the future. The comments were full of hearts and well wishes. I looked at the date. I circled it on my calendar, not for revenge, but for clarity. It gave me a boundary, a finish line, a moment to prepare for. In the weeks leading up to it, I took care of myself in a way that felt deliberate. I drank more water. I stretched in the mornings. I cleaned out my apartment, swapped old sheets for new ones. Small, simple things, but they mattered. Because when your heart has been reduced to a cautionary tale, reclaiming your own peace is a kind of protest. I made plans for that weekend, booked a solo getaway to the coast. A quiet inn, no phone calls, no social media, just space and stillness. The day before I left, I went to a print shop and had the final version of the envelope sealed. Thick paper, clean font, no return address. Inside, the screenshots, the timeline, the voice note transcripts. A short note, typed and centered. "I don't know you, but I knew him, and I think you deserve to know the version he kept from you." That was it. I placed the envelope in my bag. Not for drama, not for spectacle, but for precision. Because I didn't want to burn his life down. I wanted to light the room just enough for someone else to see where the rot lived. And when the time came, I would do it without noise, without warning. Just a woman delivering the truth on her own time, with her head held high. The night hummed with the kind of soft tension that only weddings can stir. Champagne glasses clinking, heels clicking against polished floors, the faint echo of laughter layered over string music. Everything sparkled. Everything pretended. I stood outside the venue for a full minute before walking in. Not because I was nervous, but because I knew the air inside would be heavier, denser, built on things unsaid. The place was beautiful. A rooftop ballroom dressed in fairy lights and expensive florals. I recognized some of the guests, old friends from our mutual circles, faces I hadn't seen since the days Daniel and I were a wee. They didn't see me. I was careful about that. I didn't come to be noticed. I came to deliver. The envelope rested in my bag, stiff against the side of my coat. Cream cardstock. Simple handwriting. Inside, the contents were methodical. A brief note, printed screenshots, key timestamps, a transcript of one voice note with his tone of regret still clinging to the syllables. It wasn't everything, just enough. Enough to shake the foundation, to pull the curtain back before vows were exchanged in blind faith. I scanned the room until I found her. She looked radiant. That kind of joy that radiates when someone believes they're standing at the edge of forever. She laughed with her shoulders, held her wine like it was part of the celebration. She hadn't seen me yet. I didn't move quickly. I waited for the right moment. When she stepped away from the crowd, closer to the bar, alone for just a breath. That was when I crossed the floor. She turned as I approached, a smile already forming, polite and expectant. Probably assuming I was a guest she hadn't met, someone from his side. I stopped just short of invading her space, my voice calm, quiet. "Hi, I won't take much of your time." She blinked, the smile faltering. I reached into my bag, pulled out the envelope, and held it out between us. "I think you deserve to know how your fiancé defines commitment." That's all I said. She didn't take it immediately, just looked at it, then at me, searching for context, for drama. But I didn't offer any. I held it steady until she took it with slow, uncertain fingers. And then I turned. No explanation, no warning shot. Just the truth. Hand delivered. Right on time. I walked back through the crowd unnoticed. Past strangers who toasted illusions. Past Daniel, who was across the room with his back to me laughing at something I couldn't hear. He never saw me come in. He never saw me leave. But she did. And by the time he figured out what I'd done, the envelope would already be open. The truth already in motion. There would be no undoing it. And I wouldn't be there to explain a thing. By the time I stepped back onto the street, the sky had darkened into that soft indigo that only appears at the end of something. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The envelope was no longer mine, and neither was the story it contained. I walked 2 blocks to where my car was parked, the city buzzing around me with its usual hum of weekend rituals, horns, heels, laughter from sidewalk tables. None of it touched me. Inside the car, I sat in stillness for a few minutes, not to recover, to absorb. I'd done what I came to do, and not a single nerve in my body trembled. That surprised me. I thought I might feel vindicated or shaken, but what I felt was alignment, like I'd returned something to its rightful place. I drove straight to the inn, small, quiet, coastal air curling in through the open windows like a balm. No room service, just a welcome note and a chilled bottle of sparkling water on the nightstand. I didn't check my phone. Instead, I slipped into the robe I'd packed, uncorked the wine, and sank into the balcony chair facing the sea. The ocean moved in its usual rhythm, indifferent to weddings, envelopes, and truths too heavy to carry down an aisle. The wind was soft against my skin, the kind of softness that feels earned. When I finally turned my phone over, it had already begun. Missed calls, unread messages, first from Daniel, then from a few mutual friends, one from a number I didn't recognize. The notifications stacked like bricks, dozens. Each one an echo from the storm I'd left behind. I didn't open any of them. Not out of cruelty, out of peace. I sipped my wine, letting the silence fill the space they could no longer reach. Back at the venue, she would have read every word, seen the screenshots, recognized the timestamps that overlapped with their early dates. The message where he asked me for one last night together, the voice note that didn't sound confused, it sounded familiar, practiced. I pictured her standing in front of him, holding the paper in her hands, asking a question that didn't need an answer. I didn't need to see it unfold. I didn't need to hear his excuses or witness the implosion. The beauty of the truth is that it doesn't require performance. It only requires delivery. And I had delivered. Not with noise, not with vengeance, but with precision. The same precision he never thought I would wield. The night stretched ahead of me, quiet and full. I poured another glass and leaned back, letting the sound of the waves carry me into sleep. Somewhere else, a wedding was unraveling. But here, in this room by the sea, I was finally whole and completely free. The next morning, the world didn't end. Birds still moved through the sky, waves still reached for the shore. The sun came through the gauzy curtains in pale ribbons, painting the bed in quiet gold. I lay there for a while, listening to the stillness. No chaos, no regrets. Just the absence of tension, the kind that had once lived in my chest without name or shape. Now it was gone. When I reached for my phone, the notifications had multiplied. Daniel again, 4 missed calls, 5 messages. The latest read, "What did you do?" Others followed, some from mutual friends I hadn't spoken to in months. Their tones varied. One said, "You went too far." Another said, "I don't blame you." Someone else just sent, "Wow." I didn't respond. Let the storm stay where it belonged. Because silence, when chosen, has its own kind of sound. A weight, a finality. I scrolled through the messages, not out of curiosity, but confirmation. That it had landed. That the envelope had done its job. That the truth, quietly delivered, had spoken louder than any confrontation ever could. The wedding was postponed. That much I gathered from a friend's half-coded update online. Sometimes love asks for space. Please respect privacy, the post said, tagged with her name but no photo. The comments were turned off. I wondered if she was still at the venue, if she'd gone home, if she was staring at the same screenshots I had once stared at in disbelief, reading and rereading, hoping for a different context that never came. I wondered if she'd cried, or screamed, or just sat in cold, hollow silence. But I didn't linger on the thought. This wasn't her pain to carry alone. It had been mine first. And what I'd passed to her wasn't cruelty, it was clarity. She deserved to enter marriage with full knowledge of the man waiting at the altar. Whether she walked away or still chose him was no longer my concern. That part of the story no longer belonged to me. I spent the rest of the day reading on the balcony, letting the wind turn the pages when I forgot to. I went for a walk by the water,
let sand cling to the hem of my jeans. I ate dinner at a small cafe where no one knew my name. There was no vengeance in the way I moved through the day. No hunger for fallout. Just peace. Because I hadn't destroyed anything. I'd simply refused to protect a lie. Daniel would spin his own version of the story. He always did. Maybe he'd call it sabotage. Maybe he'd say I was jealous, unhinged, bitter. The truth rarely flatters the man who tried to bury it. But I didn't need to correct him. I had already spoken. Once. Clearly. And that was enough. By Monday, the city had caught fire. Socially, not literally. The kind of fire that doesn't burn down buildings, but scorches reputations. The kind of fire that spreads in the group chats no one ever leaves. In the hushed pauses of conversations between old college friends and colleagues who still followed each other out of habit. I didn't need to be present to feel it. Rumors moved faster than facts, and in the absence of my voice, speculation filled the void. Some said I crashed the rehearsal dinner. Others said I sent the envelope anonymously through a third party. One even claimed I photoshopped the screenshots. I read all of it, quietly. I didn't correct anyone, because the truth didn't need defending. It had already been delivered with timestamps and context, signed and sealed in Daniel's own words. She hadn't taken him back. That much became clear by midweek. Her social media went
dark. The engagement post disappeared. No announcement, just quiet deletion. Like someone erasing pencil from paper, but pressing too hard, leaving the shape of what used to be. Daniel, on the other hand, tried to salvage the narrative. He posted something vague, a black screen, a single line. Sometimes people don't know the whole story. He left comments open. They didn't go well. Some defended him, sure. There's always someone who thinks neutrality is nobility. But most weren't so forgiving. Not after the screenshots made their way into private circles. Not after people started connecting timelines and realizing how close the overlap had been. He didn't delete the post, but he stopped engaging. That's how he always handled consequence, by pretending it would dissolve if he waited long enough. But this time, the silence wasn't in his favor. It didn't absolve, it exposed. I stayed out of it. No comments, no stories, no cryptic quotes or hidden jabs. I didn't need to step into the wildfire. I'd already lit the match. The wind took care of the rest. Friends started reaching out, some cautiously, others more direct. One message said, "I didn't realize it was that bad. I'm sorry." Another read, "I'm proud of you." Seriously. Even a few strangers messaged, people who'd heard pieces of the story and wanted to say thank you. Not because they knew me, but because something about what I did gave them language they hadn't had before. Permission, maybe. Proof that quiet strength can still cut through noise. I didn't respond to most of them. Not out of coldness, but because there was nothing left to add. The envelope had carried everything that needed to be said. And the aftermath, the whispers, the wildfire, the silence, wasn't destruction. It was revelation. Daniel had told me I wasn't wife material, but the truth was I wasn't the kind of woman he could fool twice. And the world had finally seen that for itself. It didn't take long for the spiral to begin. A mutual friend, someone who used to vouch for him, who once called him misunderstood, sent me a voice note. Not with questions, not even with sympathy. Just an update, like a dispatch from the eye of the storm. "He's unraveling," she said. "You might want to stay offline for a bit." I didn't ask for details, but she gave them anyway. After the rehearsal dinner, he had tried to explain. Not to his fiancée, she'd already left, but to everyone else. The groomsmen, the family friends, the vendors scrambling to confirm whether the ceremony was still happening. He told them it was a mistake, that the messages weren't what they looked like, that I was bitter, that I showed up to ruin him. But it's hard to spin a story when the evidence is sitting in someone else's hands, dated, time-stamped, and dripping with your own voice. She didn't yell at him, apparently, didn't scream or throw the envelope. She just packed a bag that night and left the suite they were sharing. Quiet exit, just like mine. I imagine him standing in that room holding the papers, flipping through them the way he once flipped through excuses in our old apartment. Desperate for a version that could still make him look like the one who tried. But Daniel never tried. Not really. He maintained, he floated, he performed. And when things cracked, he stitched the surface without ever checking what was rotting underneath. That strategy doesn't hold up under scrutiny. Not when someone finally forces the light in. He started texting me again, this time with a different tone, less anger, more desperation. Please, Ava, just talk to me. I need to explain. You could have handled this differently. I didn't reply, because I didn't owe him a platform. He wanted access to the part of me that used to soothe his mistakes. The woman who gave him space to twist half-truths into misunderstandings. But that woman no longer existed. She left when he told her she wasn't wife material. She left when he chose convenience over clarity. And in her place stood someone he never expected. Someone who didn't need an apology to feel whole again. Word spread. His new job opportunity fell through. A friend of his fiancée's worked at the same firm. Awkward timing, bad optics. No one said it outright, but the message was clear. They wanted distance. Daniel hadn't just lost the wedding, he'd lost the illusion of being the good guy who simply got caught in bad timing. Now, he was a man who blurred boundaries, straddled commitments, and left fingerprints on truths he swore never happened. And all I did was hand over the proof. No smear campaign, no social media tirade, just the facts. Presented once, delivered quietly, and powerful enough to take everything else down with them. Some evenings, the silence in my apartment felt deeper than usual, not empty, just still. The kind of stillness that comes after a storm, when everything has settled, but the air still hums with memory. That's when I found myself thinking back, not to Daniel, not to the wedding, or the messages, or even the moment I handed her the envelope, but to the sentence. The one he said with a straight face and a steady voice. You're not exactly wife material. I remembered everything about that moment. The way the light from the kitchen window fell across the counter. The slow swirl of steam rising from my tea. His tone, measured, almost rehearsed. He said it like he was doing me a favor. Like the truth, delivered early, was a kindness. But the truth wasn't the problem. The problem was the lie behind it. Because when he said I wasn't wife material, he didn't mean I wasn't loving enough, loyal enough, present enough. What he meant, what he could never say out loud, was that I wasn't pliable. I asked hard questions. I noticed inconsistencies. I didn't fall in line when charm tried to replace accountability. I was too aware, too clear, too difficult to mislead. And that made me inconvenient. He didn't want a partner. He wanted an audience. Someone who would clap at the right moments, believe the best lines, and look away when the curtain slipped. But I never did. And that was the real reason he left. Not because I failed some invisible test of devotion or domestic grace, but because I saw him too clearly. Clarity is dangerous to men like Daniel. Not the theatrical kind.
the quiet kind. The kind that doesn't shout but remembers. The kind that tracks patterns and waits for them to repeat. It's easy to mistake silence for softness, to assume that because a woman doesn't raise her voice, she'll never raise a boundary. He made that mistake, and he paid for it. Not in revenge, but in revelation. Because what I handed her wasn't just proof of his betrayal, it was a reflection of the man he was, of the man he tried to hide, and of the woman I had become. That reflection had been forming for years, through every half-truth, every dismissed concern, every quiet moment where I knew something was off but stayed anyway, hoping he'd eventually choose honesty. He never did. So I chose it for both of us. And in doing so, I finally understood what it meant to be wife material. It's not about being agreeable. It's about knowing your worth, holding your ground, and walking away from anyone who tries to measure your value by how easy you are to deceive. There's a point after impact when everything goes still. Not because the damage isn't real, but because the echo takes time to catch up. That's how the days felt after the envelope, like the world was still catching its breath. I didn't hear from her. Not a single message. She didn't ask if it was true. Didn't press for my motives. She didn't need to. The folder had done its job. I'd handed over receipts, not rumors. Intentionality, not impulse. And when something is that clear, the questions fall away. All that's left is decision. She made hers. The engagement was over, quietly dissolved, but undeniably done. I heard through a friend that she returned the ring by mail. No dramatic scene, no confrontation, just a padded envelope, unsigned, delivered to the address they briefly shared. I respected that. There's a kind of dignity in women who choose silence not as surrender, but as strategy, who don't shout to be heard because the truth already said enough. That's what this had become, an unraveling done in near silence. No one changed their profile pictures, no one posted a public explanation. It all faded the way bad chapters should, without ceremony. Meanwhile, Daniel kept trying to stir noise. Small, calculated bursts. A comment here, a cryptic post there. But his reach was shrinking. People stopped engaging. Friends withdrew. The man who once held court at every table now found himself sitting alone. And me? I didn't feed the fire. I didn't share what happened. I didn't correct the whispers. I didn't need to. Because when your actions are rooted in truth, silence becomes louder than any defense. I focused on the parts of my life that had nothing to do with him. I reorganized my workspace, reconnected with clients, cooked meals that didn't have to be shared. I let joy back in, piece by piece. Not because I was healed completely, but because I had cleared enough space for something new to grow. And every time I felt tempted to explain myself, to justify why I did what I did, I reminded myself, no one asked him to justify the betrayal. So why should I justify the boundary? What I did wasn't retaliation. It wasn't driven by pain. It was clarity in motion. He made the choices. I simply revealed them. There's an old saying, the truth doesn't need a defense. It
just needs a witness. That night at the rehearsal dinner, I chose to be one. For myself. For her. For every version of me who once stayed quiet to keep the peace. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't make a scene. But I did something far more dangerous to a man who lives behind charm. I let him speak for himself. And then I let the silence speak for me. He tried one more time. The message came a week after everything unraveled. Simple, deceptively calm. Can we talk? That was it. No apology, no admission, just a request dressed like a courtesy, as if a conversation could roll back time and restore whatever power he thought he still had. I didn't respond, not because I wanted to punish him, but because I'd already listened to everything I needed to hear. And none of it came from his mouth. It came from the pattern, the timeline. The DMs he forgot were traceable, and the promises he never imagined would be compared side by side. Closure doesn't come from a conversation with the person who broke you. It comes from realizing you never needed their permission to walk away. I'd already closed the loop. He just hadn't accepted that he was no longer part of it. Over the next few days, the messages kept coming, some tender, some defensive. He oscillated between, "I miss you," and "You didn't have to do this." It was classic Daniel, testing different tones to see which one would work. The soft pull, the guilt angle, the shared history bait. None of it moved me. He was talking to the version of me that used to answer, the woman who used to explain, de-escalate, soothe, the one who thought love could be repaired if you just stayed long enough and forgave fast enough. But she was gone. She left the moment he handed me a breakup like it was a business memo. Left when he called me unworthy of marriage, not because I lacked value, but because I saw too clearly. I'd watched him shape stories before, watched him say just enough truth to make the lie digestible. He believed the past could be rewritten if the new script sounded sincere. But a rewritten script doesn't change the original damage. And I wasn't going to be an editor for a story that no longer belonged to me. One afternoon, I opened my phone and reread the first message he sent me after our breakup. The one where he asked if I'd sleep with him again. For closure. That was the word he used. Closure. He wanted it then, on his terms. And now, he wanted it again. Still on his terms. But that's not how this works. Closure isn't something you ask from someone you've deceived. It's something you earn through accountability, through change, through silence that doesn't beg to be rescued. I didn't need his reasons. I didn't need his voice in my ear one more time. All I needed was what I already had. My calm, my clarity, my choice. So I read his final message, then closed my phone and turned it face down on the table. And in that quiet act, I gave myself something he never could. The end. On my terms. In my voice. No conversation required. It's strange how peace arrives, not with celebration, but with stillness. I felt it for the first time standing at my kitchen sink, rinsing coffee mugs from the morning before. There was no music playing, no background noise to mask the quiet. Just the sound of water and the steady realization that I was alone, completely and exactly where I needed to be. No messages, no missed calls, no emotional landmines waiting to detonate in my inbox. The silence wasn't a void anymore. It was mine. For the first time in years, I wasn't orbiting someone else's mood. I wasn't waiting to be chosen, explained to, or rescued. I wasn't decoding mixed signals or making peace with half answers. I was sovereign. That word had never meant much to me before. It sounded lofty, almost ceremonial. But now it felt precise, not grand, just solid, like a truth that had always been there, waiting for me to remember it. My life had become a space I no longer had to defend. My time was mine. My decisions weren't filtered through someone else's comfort. The air in my apartment even felt different, lighter somehow, like it had been holding its breath for years. Daniel wasn't gone from the world, of course. I still saw glimpses of him now and then. A friend of a friend would mention his name in passing. A tagged photo might appear before I could mute it. But none of it stirred anything in me. He was background noise. Static in a room I no longer stood in. The folder, the one I'd once guarded like a shield, was now filed away. Not in anger, not in fear, but in closure. Labeled and stored, like a chapter I no longer needed to reread. I didn't keep it as proof for others. I kept it for the version of me who once doubted her own clarity. The one who second-guessed her instincts every time he spun a story with soft eyes and practiced hands. She deserved to know she wasn't wrong, and I owed her the ending she never thought she'd write. Sometimes I would sit on my balcony with a glass of tea and let the wind move through my hair. I didn't need grand declarations or romantic recoveries. I didn't crave justice in the way others imagined. I had already found it. In the simple act of walking away, in the structure I built out of pain, in the silence I no longer feared. Daniel used to say I had a calm that was almost intimidating. At the time, I thought he meant it as a compliment. Now I know better. He feared that calm because he couldn't shake it, couldn't rattle it with charm or bend it with guilt. That calm wasn't emptiness, it was strength, and it was mine, always had been. He just didn't see it until it was already out of his reach. The words still echo sometimes, not with pain, but with a strange kind of clarity. You're not exactly wife material. It comes back to me when I fold laundry alone on a Sunday morning. When I order takeout for one and set the table anyway. When I pause before answering a question that demands less truth than I'm willing to give. It used to sting, that line, like something had been stripped away, like my value had been measured and found lacking. But now, I see it for what it really was. Not a judgment of my worth. A confession of his fear. What Daniel meant, beneath the surface of those 5 little words, was something far more revealing. You're not easy to lie to. You ask for more than I can give. You won't let me coast on charm and empty promises. You won't be small to make me feel bigger. You're not the kind of woman who lets things slide quietly just to keep the peace. That's what he meant. And that's why he left. Because wife material to him was pliability. It was quiet compliance dressed up as devotion. It was giving without boundary. Forgiving without accountability. Loving without expectation. But that's not love. That's erasure. And I had spent too many years softening my voice, dulling my instincts, excusing behavior that should have been named and confronted. I'm not wife material by his definition. I'm not built to smile through dishonesty. I'm not made to pretend silence is a virtue when it's really just fear in disguise. I'm not someone who watches the truth walk out the door and begs it to come back dressed in apologies. What I am, what I've learned to be, is a woman who doesn't chase closure through conversation. A woman who builds it, line by line, and signs her name to it with grace. The legacy of that sentence doesn't belong to him anymore. It belongs to me. It lives in the way I protect my peace without apology, in the way I no longer ask people to meet me halfway when they never intended to walk, in the way I trust myself, not because I'm infallible, but because I listen now, closely. That sentence was supposed to break me, quietly, cleanly. Instead, it became the spark, the one that burned through the last of my illusions and lit the path forward. He said I wasn't wife material, and maybe he was right, because I was never meant to fit inside
someone else's idea of love. I was meant to define my own, and I have. The final alert came in the middle of a quiet afternoon. Not from Daniel, not from anyone in our tangled history, just a soft chime from my banking app. A transaction cleared, a routine update, one of many. But I stood still after it buzzed, my hand resting on the edge of the counter, and I let it ring in my mind, not as a warning, but as a reminder. I was watching, not from paranoia, from presence. That alert wasn't about money. It was about attention, about boundaries that no longer blurred the moment love entered the room, about a woman who now trusted herself to see clearly, even when the surface looked calm. Daniel was gone from my life. Not just physically, emotionally, spiritually, completely. He no longer lived in the corners of my thoughts, in the spaces between questions. I didn't wonder what he was doing. I didn't scan faces in restaurants or feel the pull of unfinished conversations. There were none left. I had closed every door. Some people heal with noise, with declarations and grand exits and stories told until the air runs out. But I healed by choosing not to retell this one. Not because it didn't matter, but because I had outgrown the need to carry it forward. It belonged to the past, to the woman who once waited for clarity from someone who offered only confusion, to the version of me who thought love was proven by how much silence you could endure. Now, I live differently. Not louder, not harder, just sharper, more intact. I stopped needing people to validate how it ended. I stopped explaining the decision to anyone who hadn't lived inside the ache of being slowly erased by someone who swore they saw you. I stopped performing survival. Instead, I moved through my days with deliberate ease. I made decisions without apology. I took long walks without checking my phone. I said no without guilt. I made room only for the people who showed up in full. That was the quiet gift of all of it. Not revenge, not vindication, freedom, not the loud kind with confetti and new beginnings that look good in photos. The kind you feel when you realize your peace is no longer negotiable. When you can sit alone and know that nothing is missing. Daniel said I wasn't wife material, but he never understood what I was made of. Steel wrapped in stillness. Grace sharpened by memory, a calm that did not break, only waited. And when the moment came, I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I didn't rage. I chose myself, fully, unapologetically, and without permission.